I've started the repairs on the Phase 4 muscle hatch after I didn't have oil circulation and did damage to some of the bearings, which I'll show you later on. As part of that rebuild and repair, I've been going through the external oil cooler and filter kit that I had fitted to the car. And I've come across something that I think I need to warn many of you about. If you're fitting a remote oil filter, oil cooler, or a combo kit like I have, you use these adapters. One goes on the engine where the oil filter used to be, and the other one holds the filter in a new location with the remote hoses going to and from it. There's a danger with both of these fittings that you need to be aware of. Well, actually, there's two faults. The first one is one of omission, which might not even seem like a fault to some of you, but it can cause the sort of problems I've just had. And that is, if you get your hoses the wrong way around at either the engine end or the filter end, the anti-drain valve in the filter becomes a block switch and you will get no oil circulation. Mixing your hoses up is easy to do because these fittings aren't stamped in and out. So I'm going to take my letter punches and mark them. On the engine, the side port is the exit and the center port is where the oil goes out, circulates through the remote system and comes back into the engine. At the remote filter head, the side port is where the oil comes in, goes through the filter, past the anti-drain valve, and then goes out through the central port. I've marked these fittings because in the pressure of a racing system, or months later when you're working on the car and have forgotten about it, it's just too easy to get those hoses mixed up. So they're clearly stamped in and out, out and in. Insurance. After you've fitted any remote oil system, do what I should have done. Open the line where the last remote hose goes back to the engine, briefly start the engine and stop it, and check that you've got oil circulating right through the system and back to the engine. It's better to waste a tiny bit of oil than damage an engine. Ask me how I know this. Marking those ports is a minor improvement, but the one that I really want to talk to you about is a problem with these aftermarket oil filter mounting points, and that is the way that the passages inside are flowed, or more correctly, should I say, not flowed. If you take these fittings off and the one inside, what you see, and you don't notice this when you're putting it on the car because you're tending to be excited about putting on the improved remote oil kit. But when you have a careful look at these heads, the oil passages are terrible. You get fooled by the nice shiny colours, but the oil passages come in like this, and where they overlap, there's no flowing at all at that point. It's just sharp edges and narrow confines. And so the poor manufacturing and the lack of machining inside these heads, well, it'll allow oil to go through, but it becomes a blockage point that will about halve the amount of the size of the oil passages compared with, say, your oil remote hoses. So the thing is to take these fittings off and to get in there with an air-driven little grinder with a round bit on it and smooth things out. Take the bumps out and just make it a little bit flow. It's not a major job. It's not like you're blowing a cylinder head. Easy to do because they're aluminium. You've got to make sure you don't damage the threads inside the head. But if you ever buy an oil filter mounting remote kit, have a look at the heads and you'll see what I mean. Best to avoid that problem before you put it on the car. While I've got the exhaust system off the car to be able to remove the sump and access the big end bearings from underneath the engine, let me put to rest comments that frequently crop up on my YouTube videos, and that is build, you really ought to fit a set of extractors. Let's put that to bed once and for all. The A4 version of the J series is more powerful than the A1s, A2s and A3s. And one of the reasons is right here, because the exhaust manifold is cast into the head. And so you have a what used to be called a Siamese exhaust port. Not politically correct probably these days, so let's just call it an oval exhaust port. So there is only one port out of the head on either side. You don't have the three pipes coming into one. So you can't build an extractor in the normal sense. What the factory setup has is the cat sitting there, and then it goes out to a factory pipe system. Let me show you what Danny from Toronto Exhaust made me to replace all of this.
This video is brought to you by Toronto Exhaust Newcastle.
This factory fitting is where the cat used to be attached. We've cut that off, and Danny's replaced it with 2.5 inch pipe, equal lengths for both ports, joining in the middle into a 3-inch system. So it's equal length, full flowing and tuned, no restrictions. That's why I don't need extractors. Now it's time to have a look at the crankshaft and see if it's marked at all. Have a look at the oil windage tray. This is just a standard Honda part. If I was going to make a windage tray for a racing car, that's pretty much exactly how I'd make it. These things are beautifully made. Once again, another bit of wonderful Honda gear. Look at the counterbalancing on this crankshaft and the clearances. Huge main bearing caps. Nothing's going to move there. Let's have a careful look at the crankshaft. You can see with the big end bearing end caps removed from the con rods that there's no marks on this crank. It's clean as. So I've caught it just in time. There's no drama there. Any of those. No marks that I can see. No, none of that is damaged. That's a great relief. I've got my big end bearings out of the muzzle hatch. Let's have a close look at them. Number 1 doesn't seem too bad. There's wear on number 2. Number 3 looks most worn, along with 4. 5's got wear, and so has 6. So all 6 big end bearings are showing signs of wear. So luckily I just need to replace my big end bearings. Let's talk big end bearings, but Honda big end bearings. Something I didn't know until I spoke to my Honda expert mate David Brown is that all big end bearings on Hondas are a different size and they're colour coded marked. For example, on a 4-cylinder Honda, typically number 1, the bearing has a yellow mark on it, number 2 is brown, number 3 is green, and number 4 is pink. If you don't believe me, Google Honda bearing sizes, and those colours mark out the different thicknesses. So Honda goes to the trouble of putting minutely different sized big end bearings to match the crank on all of their cars. If you weren't looking for the colour marks on the sides of these big end bearings, you wouldn't notice them at all. They're barely visible. When you look for them, they're there. And on mine, number 1, 2 and 3 on this V6 are green, and number 4, 5 and 6 are brown. And the brown mark just looks like a tiny, tiny little bit of oil that got burnt there years ago. But it's not. It's a size marking indicator. So that's what I've got to get. I've got to get a set of bearings, but 3 green and 3 brown, and fit them to the car. I've just priced a set of genuine Honda big end bearings for this V6. $348 Australian. What a rip-off. And they take 3 weeks to come from Japan. So it looks like in the longer term, it's probably going to make more economic sense to throw this motor away and buy a whole wrecked car. Bearing in mind, I could go to all the trouble of putting those big end bearings in and then still find other parts damaged in this engine when it was starved of oil. I don't know what's going on in the heads. So it looks like it's going to make more sense to buy a whole car, a little bit more expensive, but that way I get spare parts, I get tyres from a ute, spare battery and other bits and pieces and so on. We'll see what happens. The fun continues.